This is Dan Humberg, harvestfires.com. This is a short instructional video regarding how to connect the air lines or the air supply system up to the exhaust system enclosure on a fire stop kit. The video I'm showing you now should apply to nearly every fire stop kit that we offer. They may look different, but the methodology that I'm going to tell you here is the same. Let's start with a piece here as an example. This is the top of the enclosure from a kit for a case 8240. Every one of the kits will have some piece that has this 4-inch hole in it. It's generally on the side of the engine that would make it most easy to reach the air system, depending on where we mount the air system in that particular computer. And so we've got that 4-inch entry hole, and that's where we're going to introduce the air. We're going to do that in most cases with a stub entry collar, an HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning system collar, like you'd have in your ducts in your house. This is light galvanized, so it's pretty easy to work with. So I've got a 4-inch hole here, and this is a 4-inch collar. The collar has a little bit of a raised ridge or flange there, and it has a whole bunch of fingers here. If I'm doing this, I generally bend probably 4 or more of those fingers, maybe kind of on the 4 sides of the compass dial or opposite each other, out 90 degrees. And I would probably take a pliers and try to make those bends as close as possible to this flange. In fact, I might even cut the flange into the edge of that ridge there, and take a sharp or a flat-jawed pliers and open it up so that this flange comes straight off of this ridge. As we do it right now, it'll hold this ridge off of the thing, but for purposes on the bench, I won't mess around with all of the cutting and trimming. But I'd probably extend those cuts on these 4 into the widest part of that flange around the edge here, and then bend that tab out and flatten it out nice from the outer part of that ridge out. Once you've done that, we have to figure out how to get the air up and out of here, and then headed the direction that you need to connect up to your air system. So this is the beginning point. Once you've done that on your system, you can push this into that hole. And again, this one doesn't fit real well because those fingers are kind of, well, they're just not optimal right now, but I can get pretty much down onto that face of that. And once you have done that, you can reach inside and you can push the rest of these fingers out on the inside of the opening so that they bind it now between these on the outside and these on the inside. And so when you're on your system, once you have the tin installed, you can insert this in there and reach inside and bend all of those fingers out, the remaining fingers, other than the 4 we've got bent out already. The remaining fingers on the inside of the tin, bend them up tight against the inside face of the enclosure tin. And that will lock this piece. Well, it'll put it on there. It won't necessarily lock it on. You still may be able to rotate it. I generally then shoot screws through these 4 holes or 4 tabs. You may want to drill a hole through those tabs ahead of time, just to have the pilot hole for that one done. But then you can actually shoot the screw through the tin of the enclosure. They're self-drilling screws, and they'll go through and without a lot of difficulty and cut through there and hold that on. So once we've got that screwed down in place and the tabs on the inside, that'll be pretty much fixed on there at that point. And that's our starting point for this. The next piece is I call it a Flex 90, an HVAC Flex 90. That'll give us some ability to orient the rest of this however you need it on your particular combine. On the case combines, generally I'm coming up out of here and I have to come up and go over a coolant line and head over the top of the valve cover. And so generally, and I also have to avoid the oil fill cap that's on top of that valve cover. So we're usually coming up and going sideways, either just sideways or some combination of sideways and forward, but whatever you need, you can do that. In fact, before you actually put this collar on this thing, you can put it together with a Flex 90 like this, slide them together as well, I hope so. slide them together tight. They should go in pretty much up to where this crimp ends. This one's a little tight, but if I take this label off and it'll probably go in there, but you push that in until you get it as far on as you can down near the bottom of that crimp flange or crimped area. And then you can test this to see, okay, am I going to be able to get this oriented the way I want? So the last thing you can do before you start fixing it on there would be to slip this rubber elbow on the end of this fitting. Again, put it on about as far as is appropriate. In this case, it covers up the crimped area. And now I can use all three pieces and test what bend I need of this HVAC fitting in order to get lined up to head over the top of the valve cover in my case. So, and you want to make sure that you know how you're going to be able to do that when you get on the machine. So anyway, between being able to rotate this and put it on in any direction, and being able to rotate this and redirect it, you should be able to get oriented so that you come out of the enclosure, shift over to go around the valve cover, the oil fill cap on the valve cover, and then go over the top of the valve cover itself with the rubber 90 and aim out where we need to get to the rest of the air system. So those are the three pieces. Like I said, once you know how you're going to orient that, you can mark this with a Sharpie or something like that to indicate how it's going to go together. And then you can put this in place, like I said, by putting it in, screwing it down, and bending those internal fingers out. Once you have that done, you can put this piece on here, slip it all the way down, orient it the way you want, and then you can shoot through. I usually shoot 2 or 3 or 4 of the sheet metal screws through this to lock these two tightly together once we have it positioned the way we want. You can wait to do that. You don't have to do it right away. Maybe you want to wait until you get everything kind of directed the way you want it before you shoot those screws through. But then you can fix that with screws. Once you have that done, you can also test fit or slip this rubber elbow on there so that you have that in the orientation that you need it to point where you want. And then I actually shoot usually 2 or 3 or 4 screws through the rubber and bite into the galvanized fitting to lock the rubber onto this galvanized fitting. You have to be a little bit careful because you can pull them straight through the rubber if you're not careful. So you drill through the rubber with it and then push through until you feel it bite through the galvanized, and then when the rubber head pulls down in tight here, just stop in time to keep from pulling it all the way through. So that'll give us the pieces on here in place. Once you have those where you want them on there, I use some of the aluminum foil tape that I will provide you with the kit. You'll get a small roll of that with the kit, and go around the base of this to seal up this connection onto this, because the air hasn't done us any good. We don't want to leak. We don't want to lose that air before it has a chance to get in here and flush that system for us. So you tighten that up by taking strips of that aluminum foil tape and wrapping them or putting them around the base of this. Obviously it's not a great fit because we got 90 degrees going into here, but you can do that. That tape will both bend and stick pretty well, so it'll form fit to that when you press it in and stick on there. Similarly, I'd wrap a strip of it around this joint here and tighten that up with the tape so that we don't leak air there. And then I actually take the tape, strips of it, and wrap it around these sliding joints on this fitting as well to both seal those joints up, but also to lock them in place once we have them in the orientation that it'll work for you. That'll stiffen this whole thing up and keep it from rattling around and sliding around and possibly coming loose, but it also stops leakage out of here before we get the air in where it helps us. The last step is probably to wrap a strip of that tape and connect both the rubber fitting to this as well, in addition to your screws, just to seal up that connection and firm it up a little bit. Once you've done that, the rest of the connections on the way out of here are with the band clamps on here. This would be 4-inch band clamp onto 4-inch aluminum, and those are easy and pretty straightforward to connect. So that's the way that we put this starting collar onto the enclosure tin. Now there are a couple kits, I think maybe the early model 8120s and maybe the 8010s, where this may get us up too high to use this starting collar, and you can actually create this same effect as these fingers by simply marking around here about a ½ inch or 3/4 of an inch up here and cutting little slits, a finger every 3/4 of an inch into that mark, and then using that just like this with those fingers. But it keeps you down closer here if for any reason it looks like you need to do it that way. And you'd bend out 4 of those tabs, and the others you'd let go inside, and then you have to reach down through the 90 here before you put the rubber one on and get your hand in there and bend those tabs out. But you can do the same thing. You just create this kind of a fingered arrangement on the bottom of this if it turns out that this is too high for your combine or your enclosure. If it's one of the Deere enclosures, 9770 or 9650 that I've done before, we use the same approach, probably this collar and a 90 coming out of there, out of the enclosure. It's just oriented a little bit differently, but it'll be fairly obvious to you where it has to get to when you know where your fan and your blower is and where the air is coming from. And so it's the same process. We put that through the opening in that enclosure, fix it on the same way, and use a 90 and a rubber 90 here. Some of those I may have done without this fitting. I may have simply put the start collar on there and gone straight to a rubber 90 on some of the Deeres. If it works that way, that's great. It just saves you a fitting. But it's the same concept to get in here anyway. So assess handle the parts and assess where you need to be to get the air in the right coming from this to where you got to get to for the blower. And use the parts that you need to. But most of the time it's going to be just like I showed you, a start collar, a flex 90, and then a rubber elbow, and from that point you're on to aluminum tubing and rubber fittings after that. Okay, so that's the installation of the last part to connect air to a fire stop kit. If you struggle with it somehow or have questions, you can call me. There should be a contact email or possibly a contact telephone number on the Harvest Fire's website. All right, good luck with your installation.